About this operation. After the man believed to be Osama Ben Laden had been killed early this morning in Pakistan, another crucial phase of the mission began, confirming the body's identity. Just hours later, a senior administration official confirmed that a DNA match had been made using Bin Laden family DNA and comparing it to DNA from the body. CNN chief medical correspondent and certified medical examiner Dr. Sanjay Gupta is here to kind of explain how this was possible in so short a time. Sanjay, when you see this on television shows or in legal cases, it always, takes weeks and weeks. Seems like the government was able to confirm a DNA match incredibly quickly. How so?
Well, it's interesting because when people think about DNA sequencing, that's typically what takes a very long time. But to do a match, to actually take, for example, in this case, they say maybe a sibling's DNA, that sibling's going to share about 50% of their DNA with their brother or sister. So right away you have specific areas you can sort of zero in on and say, look, are there similarities between these two samples of DNA? Between everybody, Anderson, more than 99% of our DNA is going to be the same. So the key for them in terms of this sort of genetic fingerprinting or genetic matching, as they call it, is to focus on the area that is different. And that can take a much shorter time than, for example, sequencing the entire DNA. It's not going to be perfect. No one's going to say with 100% accuracy because it is still a little bit of an imperfect science, but that's a little bit of how they do it.
Well, officials have said they compared Bin Laden's DNA to several Bin Laden family members. Do they need to run tests on all the samples simultaneously, or I assume they would have done that ahead of time and therefore just needed to compare the DNA from Bin Laden to the samples they already had?
That's exactly right. So essentially, if you have known samples from known siblings or known relatives of, in this case, the person, Bin Laden, you basically create reference samples. So you have all those relatives or reference samples sort of lined up, and then you bring in this new sample and you start to actually compare it, to do this matching. And again, looking for areas that are sort of known as junk DNA or areas that are different, and you're looking for repeats in the DNA sequence. The more repeats you see that match up with one of the relatives, the more likely it is going to be an actual match. More relatives, that increases the likelihood even further.
Very briefly, there are unconfirmed reports, and I emphasize unconfirmed, that one of those samples came from his sister, Bin Laden's sister, who died from cancer several years ago while getting treatment in Boston, and that the FBI had subpoenaed her body so they could get a DNA sample. Would they be able to check to match DNA in the field, or would they have to take the sample back to a ship or back to a base in Afghanistan or elsewhere?
That's a really good question. It's interesting because, when you think about even the machines that do these more rapid tests, they are more sophisticated machines. They need to be free of contaminants, for example. If you contaminate a sample, that's a real problem. So I don't know that whether they actually flew the sample back somehow to compare it with a sibling's DNA, or they had it at a base somewhere. They brought the machine in somehow in preparation for this. But I don't think it can be done right on site by any means. It would have to be some sort of, clean, sterile place where there's a laboratory sort of setting.
They did have the body with them, so of course, because they were only on the ground for, I believe it was 38 minutes, the whole time of the operation, so perhaps they could have done the testing with the body as they were leaving. Sanjay Gupta.